Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in just a moment.
Okay. Great.
If you're just joining us, we're going to get started in just a moment. Please take a moment to put yourselves on mute. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Janine Silversmith, and I'm the Executive Director of the Rhode Island Environmental Education Association. Just going to ask my co-host to admit people that are in the waiting room while I'm welcoming everyone. For those of you who don't know about RIA, the Rhode Island Environmental Education Association, we're a network of professionals and organizations, students, parents, community members who are all committed to promoting high quality environmental education that increases environmental literacy in all of our Rhode Island citizens, children and adults. We're all about collaboration. We host trainings, networking events, an annual conference and more, and you can find more about us at ria.org. I'll put that in the chat in just a moment. We're so excited to see so many familiar and new faces. A little bit of background about how this event came to be. Shireen Knowlton, who you'll meet in just a moment, she approached me in mid-2020, wanting to introduce me to her friend, Father Dante Tavallaro, who you will also meet in just a few moments. She just wanted to start a conversation about the overlap between our two worlds, those worlds being environmental education, or the environmental world, and religion. Before being called to St. Thomas, Dante served at St. Luke's, which was where Shireen is a parishioner. And I've worked with Shireen for many years, and I really love her and trust her. But I got to admit that at first I was a little bit nervous, a little bit worried. I won't say that I'm a person of no faith, but I have little faith. Science is more my religion. Nature is my sanctuary. I remember hearing Reverend Yearwood speak a few years ago. If you don't know about Reverend Yearwood, you should definitely check him out. He's amazing. He started what's called the Hip Hop Caucus, and he speaks truth. And he brought to my attention that the environmental community often dismisses the faith-based community in this really important work, and that there's real synergy and possibility between the two communities as far as environmental justice and activism are concerned. So I decided to kind of own and check my own prejudice and to have that first conversation with Shireen and Dante. And we've had so many more conversations since then, and I've enjoyed every single one of them. And here we are today for what we hope is just the first in many conversations and actions and partnerships to bring the faith-based community and the environmental community together. So before I hand it over to our moderators, Shireen and Dante, I just want to encourage you to please stay muted so that we can all hear the wonderful conversation that we're about to hear. Please switch to speaker view. You can usually do that in the top right corner if you're on a computer, or in the menu, it says view, and just switch to speaker view, and we'll be spotlighting the panelists as they're speaking. And if you have any questions that come up during this conversation, put them in the chat to me, and I'll be collecting them, and then our moderators will ask them to the panelists at the end. We'll have time for a Q&A at the end. Okay, so with that, I will remove my own spotlight and hand it over to Shireen and Dante to take it from here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Janine. Oh, I'm muted.
Am I muted? No. Okay, good. Thank you so much, Janine. Dante, I don't know if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, and then I can introduce myself and then the panelists.
My name is Dante Tavallero. As Jean said, I'm the priest in charge of St. Thomas Church in Greenville, Rhode Island. And so for those of you not familiar with the northwest corner of the state, Greenville is part of Smithfield, Rhode Island. I am delighted that Shireen and I started this conversation and Janine came in and we are here today. And I'm excited to see what might happen because I know as a person of faith with a little bit of a science background, I have seen great possibility for these communities coming together and how we might care for creation, a clear priority for all of our communities. So Shireen, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Dante. I'm Shireen Knowlton, and I'm the Director of Education at Roger Williams Park Zoo. And I'm also the granddaughter of an Episcopal priest. And I have to admit that growing up, church was more about community than it was about faith for me. And it was only as an adult, when I became a parishioner at St. Luke's, that it really became about the intersection of those two things and the relationship between those two things. And then professionally, obviously, I work at a zoo. I've worked in environmental education my entire adult life. And I spend a lot of time in my profession thinking about this idea of bringing people together to act on behalf of conservation or act on behalf of the planet. And so one of the things, again, that Dante and Janine and I spent time talking about is we have, these faith communities and we have these environmental education communities, and there seems to be a lot of potential in bringing all of us together to work toward these common goals. But it's not happening to the degree that it could be. So we're hoping that tonight's conversation is really going to be a step forward to that end and not just a one-off conversation. We discuss this stuff and go our separate ways. So we're really excited that we have three fantastic panelists that agreed to join us here tonight for this initial conversation and this kickoff. We have Gina DeMarco, who is the district manager of the Northern Rhode Island Conservation District. We have Dr. Jeremy Goodman, who is our executive director at the Rhode Island Zoological Society and my boss. And we have Bishop Nicholas Knisley, who is the Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Rhode Island. And again, all three of our panelists tonight have a foot in the science space and in the faith space. And we are so grateful that they've decided to join us tonight or agreed to join us tonight and share their experiences. I'm going to turn it back over to Dante, who will get us started with our conversation.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shireen. So we want to give our panelists a chance to introduce themselves to you all through the framework of our topic for tonight. And so Gina, this question will go to you first. And so those of you who are joining us for this conversation tonight, so we're going to, Shireen and I will pose a question to one of the three speakers, and then we've asked them to pass the questions to each other just to help with our flow a bit. So Gina will ask you to start us off tonight. So what has been your personal, professional journey around the care of creation and environmental stewardship? And maybe what came first for you, connection to science or faith, and maybe any experiences that have led to any intersections of those two worlds for you?
Sure, thank you, Dante. My journey towards natural resource protection began as a teen. As a Christian, I had a very strong reliance on the guidance of God in my life. I felt called to stewardship of creation, and faith was definitely my first connection, but science followed closely, as that is the route that I chose to respond to the calling of God on my life with. Serving as the district manager of the Northern Rhode Island Conservation District and in leadership roles at local churches, I have had the opportunity to educate the general public about stewardship through science-based curriculum and to preach and teach to church congregations about the mandate of stewardship to Christians as a basic tenet of the Judeo-Christian scriptures beginning in Genesis. A favorite scripture of mine is Genesis 1:26. It says, "Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all wild animals, and over the creatures that move along the ground." It is in his image and likeness that we are to connect with this earthly creation. That image is grace, love, hope, peace, kindness, joy, our own creativity, and all of the attributes of God. I make that clear in my preaching and my teaching. Another passage that impacts my teaching and preaching is from Romans 8:18-24. And I'll just quote a very small portion. It says, "For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed." So what makes creation so excited about the revealing of God's children? It's their work. This Romans passage provides great insight into the work Christians should be engaged in as we wait for that joyful time. We should be healing our neighbors near and far, working towards justice, equity among all people, and restoration of the earth and all that it contains. I have had conflict and tension in my own spiritual growth in the church. At times, there was little emphasis on caring for the creation or even issues of justice. At times, my church and career world were colliding. I credit Bible scholar N.T. Wright for helping me to gain perspective and peace in my life's flowing. My science and faith worlds have come into concert for me when I was invited to write church leadership, educational, and sermon materials for the National Association of Conservation Districts for several consecutive years, and the invitation to speak on this panel. So thank you so much for inviting me.
So I guess I'll go next. Just a disclaimer. Not a rabbi. I have no ordination whatsoever. The views I express are those strictly of myself, but I have grown up in a traditional religious Jewish household, and so early on, that's how I was raised, where religion was key. Observing the Sabbath every week and keeping kosher, whatnot. But I also grew up always loving animals. So we had every kind of pet you could imagine. Would always insist that my parents take me to every zoo possible. And so very early on, I had strong foundations, I would say, in both the religious world, the faith-based world, as well as the natural world, the environmental world. And I would say the first time they kind of intersected would probably be learning the story of Noah. Just in the Bible, They call zoos modern day arks, and I think that's kind of exactly what we are. And I was always intrigued by how he could have all these different species and how they got along and how he took care of them with only a couple people, when I knew it really took a whole small army to care for a collection that size. So I would say that that was probably the first real intersection that I had as a younger child. Between faith and my other passion of animals and the environment. Where I would say later on it really intersected again was probably after I became a veterinarian. There was an old medical animal record keeping system that all zoos use called MedArcs. It was an old DOS-based system, and every time you booted it up, a new quote would appear on the screen. And my favorite quote, which I think really kind of changed my perspective on things, was, "God don't create no junk." And it's so true. And it just kind of a little light bulb went on in my head that if it was worth God making, it's worth us saving. And I think that it was always important to save animals, and it was always important for religion. And I think that quote really just kind of connected the two worlds for me. And so that's just a little bit of my background. And Nicholas, if you want to give us yours.
Yeah. So thank you. It's been fascinating hearing both of your backgrounds. My background's different, I guess. I grew up in a family that church was just always a part of our lives. And we went to church regularly, we sang in the choirs. It was church every Sunday. And simultaneously, another part of my life, I was a small child, toddler, when the first Mercury rockets were launched, and they were perfect for a toddler. They were just about the right amount of a toddler's attention span. It was about a 2-hour mission. So you could sit and watch a suborbital flight and watch the recovery. And I would sit with my mother and watch these things. And they were so excited that I was interested in rockets, that they began to feed me science toys constantly and books about planets. And so they were both teachers and they were doing everything they could to convince me to be a scientist. So I had these two sort of tracks in my young life of growing up fascinated by astronomy, fascinated by science, and also just living in the church, going to Sunday school, going to church camps. I was a high school student when I decided I was going to read the Bible. And I remember reading the Bible on the school bus, somewhere in Exodus. I came across a quote and it just really struck me. And that's the moment when I became intentional about my faith and sort of led me to think about ministry and ordained ministry in the church. And I was really focused on that for a couple of years. And I discovered, to my surprise, that people in churches can be jerks and mean. And I kind of decided I didn't want to have anything to do with this. I was okay with God. It was the people in the church that I didn't want to be around. So I bailed. And the good place to hide, I decided, was science. So I essentially hid in chemistry and physics. And when I went to college, I was a physics major with a minor in astronomy, and went on to graduate school and studied theoretical physics and condensed matter physics, and was published. And it was when I was finishing up my doctoral research in condensed matter physics that I realized hiding from God was probably not the way I was going to find joy in my life. So found my way back in church. I mostly, that was my wife's doing. She got us back in the church because they had a choir and we were singing. Went off to seminary. They thought it was really interesting that I had a science background, but they didn't hold it against me. And I had a pretty traditional seminary formation process. And it's sort of my whole young life was these two parallel tracks of, there was a science me and there was a religion me. And I would, dazzle people sometimes with stupid science facts and confound scientists with dumb religious ideas, and kind of got along fine. When I was a priest in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, I was tapped to teach physics and astronomy at Lehigh. There had been a medical emergency, one of the faculty, and they knew I was in town, so I agreed to teach. And it was really during that time of spending my mornings as a priest and my afternoons as a physics professor at Lehigh that I started to integrate the two parts of my life. And books have come out of that, and work has come out of that. But it was the close the close collision of those two parts of my life that forced it. What's really been exciting for me is because I've found God in the world around me, as well as being a scientist. I have always been a nature-focused religious person. I find my joy and my sense of contact with God in nature, whether it's leading hikes, whether it's going to a zoo, whether it's leading a star watch, whether it's taking a pilgrimage on the water in a kayak or a canoe. I think my favorite quote from this is my wife and I were on in a meeting in Alaska with other bishops from the Episcopal Church, and we had a chance to hear from an Alaskan indigenous priest, an Episcopal priest who's an indigenous member of the Athabascan tribe, and he said, "I want to thank you, bishops, because you sent the missionaries to us. We knew the Creator God. We could see the Creator God in the sky. We could see the Creator God in the herds of elk that we cared for. We could see the Creator God in the polar bears. We could see the Creator God in the snow and the ice. But you taught us about how we can meet the person of God. And for us as Christians, it's in Jesus Christ." And he talked about the revelation of creation and the special revelation of the book. And I thought that was really helpful for me to understand that I find things about my faith and my God and my place in the created universe that way. And I find the same kinds of things in the written scriptures of my faith. And there's something to be said for having both parts of those in all of our lives in conversation. They inform each other.
I love that. And I love thinking about, those intersections and how each of us have had them in our own lives. Kind of jumping off of that, what Bishop Knisley just said. Jeremy, can you speak a little bit about whether in your personal life or your professional life, where you see the intersection of faith and environmental science or environmental education and literacy? And then how do these intersections lead to environmental stewardship?
Absolutely. For me, the intersection really makes things more meaningful. I've always known it's very important to preserve our natural world, to save all these animals, these endangered animals. And it's always been important just mainly on a scientific basis that you take one cog out of the environment and the whole thing starts to fall apart. But when I started connecting the two and thinking about what I'm doing, that's not only important work, from a scientific standpoint, but also being God's work, it made it that much more meaningful for me on a daily basis. As far as connections and as far as just you have ups and downs in works, all the time, and there's successes and there's failures, but when you know that what you're doing is really for a higher purpose, I think it really helps continue to motivate me and to keep me going and to push me even further. As far as environmental stewardship, I think there's a couple of things within the Jewish faith that really speak to environmental stewardship, and one is a book called Perek Shira, and what that is a book where all of nature is singing the praise of God. It talks about how the verses that the sun sings, and the verses that the ants praise God with, and that the sea praises God with, and that the wild fowl and whatnot, and the real takeaway for that for me is that every one of these aspects of creation is incredibly important, and we all have our own roles, and once again, just like the environmental model where you take one cog out of the wheel, it all starts to fall apart. I think same thing from a religious standpoint. The other two, the next one would be the concept, in Hebrew it's called Bal Tashchit, which means not being wasteful. It's a commandment that people should not be wasteful of things, and that's something that really speaks to the environmental movement as far as knowing our limited resources and using them carefully and properly, and with thought and intent, and not just wasting them and leaving it for somebody else is a problem. So I think those two things certainly jive well together as far as environmental stewardship. And then the last one is in Hebrew it's called the concept of tikkun olam, of kind of repairing the world. And certainly it needs it right now, and I think that certainly ties in very, very nicely for me with environmental stewardship, and that the world needs repairing in a lot of different ways, but certainly from an environmental way is just as much as any of the others, and I think looking at those various commandments and whatnot are really kind of some motivators for environmental stewardship, for me at least. Gina, what would you say to that question?
For me, it is it's every single day, where these two come to meet each other. In all of the work that I do, I have the knowledge that was provided to me through my education and through science, but really the passion that I have for serving God and caring for his creation is what definitely keeps me going. It's the in my in the work that I do. So it's the way that caring for creation is a way to love your neighbor. It's a way to provide environmental justice. It's just ingrained into every part of who I am. And one of the frustrating things for me is that sometimes within the Christian, within various Christian religions or denominations, you will have that sense of dominance over nature, and there's like less care for, it's like the earth is for me instead of it's for me to care for. So I think that having the opportunity to educate Christians about the mandate of God to care for our creation has been one of the highlights in my walk with God and my religious life. And I think, Nicholas, have you already answered that question?
No, but I could try. Let me just riff off something you said, Gina. This idea of being in creation as stewards of creation and helpers of creation. And you know that there's multiple stories of creation in the Hebrew scriptures. And the second one, the one with Adam and Eve in the garden, is really a fascinating sort of riff. It's almost like jazz. I love how these things happen. And it's a riff off other creation stories that were existent in the Middle East, and with some twists. And one of the cool twists is that human beings were not created as slaves, but as co-workers in the garden with God. And that idea of co-creating this garden, co-creating creation with God. And that's our purpose, our teleological end that we are to achieve. And it didn't quite work out the first time, but we keep coming back to that idea. And so when you think about our faith and what our faith is telling us we were created to be, this idea of working to serve and care for creation is at the core of what it is to be human. And I think it's where we find our greatest and deepest joy, whether it's in gardening or in exploring or in being inspired by the natural creation around us. We protect what we love, right? We just do. And I once sat down and thought to myself, why do I care about the environment? Why do I care about industrial waste? Where's this coming from? And I realized I'd spent so much of my life and so much of the best parts of my life in the woods and in the wilderness, experiencing the varieties of creation. And it's something that really matters to me. And I want other people to see it. And I want them to see it the way I got to see it. So I become very protective of it. Then I realized if I'm serious about this idea that God is present in creation, then I love God and I have to love creation. And you care for the people you love. So it's led me as an outdoors person and as a theologian and as a religious leader. I've always been taking pilgrimages into the woods, whether it's hikes, camping along the Grand Canyon and celebrating at the rim of celebrating the Eucharist at the rim of the Grand Canyon. Karen's got a pic. My wife has a picture of me trying desperately not to fall into the chasm. Walking through the desert, leading canoe trips down the Connecticut River, taking kayak trips with the Diocese here in Rhode Island out on the Wood River, all in an attempt to get people to fall in love with creation the way I have, so that they'll become, eco warriors, if you want to use that language, but they'll become people who are committed to protecting that which they have seen.
And I'd just like to add one thing, because what Nicholas said just triggered something off in my mind, is that I'm going to be taking a vacation in Yosemite this summer, and I'm so looking forward to it, from just seeing all the variety of wildlife and species out there. But from a religious standpoint, from a Jewish religious standpoint, there are blessings that you have to make upon seeing mountain ranges. There's blessings that you make upon rainbows and large bodies of water and all these incredible things that God's created. And so for me, it's once again, it's just another example of the intersection of yes, I'm going to go appreciate it from a naturalist standpoint, from a scientific standpoint of the incredible geography and everything that's out there, but also, from a religious standpoint as well. And I think, like I said, they're both separate, but they both really synthesize very nicely together. And once again, just makes it, for me, all that much more meaningful.
I'll just, if I could riff off something, Jeremy, there's an old idea that truth, I believe truth is truth, right? But it's like a mountain, and you climb different faces of the mountain to get to the top. And you can climb the side of the mountain to get to the truth of who we are and why we were created. And you can experience in creation and in the natural wonder, and you can experience it in religious faith. And I think we do ourselves a disservice if we say there's only one side of the mountain and don't realize that there's two sides or four sides or different faces that we can climb to get to the pinnacle.
Excellent. That's all really wonderful. And I'm taking copious notes. I'm definitely borrowing some of these ideas for upcoming sermons. But so as we know, when communities come together, things sometimes can get a bit tense, and there can be conflict. And so we want to think a little bit about where have there been the places and times when you've seen these worlds in conflict. And so Nicholas, why don't we start with you to think about what conflicts might arise as these communities come together?
Well, let's start with the Bible verse that Gina quoted early on in her opening remarks, that we were created to be rulers of creation. That's a particular translation of a Hebrew word, and it's maybe not the most accurate translation. You could translate it co-workers, you could translate it stewards. It's much more nuanced, right? And how that's translated becomes important to the kind of worldview we have. Do we have dominion over the world? And does dominion mean it belongs to us and we can use it up because God will give us another one? There's a whole wing of Christian thought and of other religious thought that said that's the purpose of the world. It's ours, have it all, and extract what wealth you want from it, and leave. You don't have to worry about the next generation because God's coming really soon and they'll get a new heaven and a new earth. That becomes really difficult. And it's not a theological school or a following that I follow. And so you have other religious voices that are rejecting that actively and seeing a different way of interpreting scripture. I think that's that sense of where we are in the economy of the universe. What is our role in the universe and how do we fit in that is critically important. A friend of mine keeps writing me, telling me that they're about to announce the UFOs, and I've actually given lectures on what will happen theologically if we encounter alien species. But one of the most important things will be, where are we in the order of creation? Are we at the pinnacle? Lovely point. The Bible talks a lot about angels. They outrank us. We're not at the top. We're somewhere on the scale. Everyone chill. Having riffed off your quote, Gina, let me toss it over to you because I'd be curious to hear what you have to say from your background.
So the question is, where do we see that conflict or coming against each other? And I think that I see it in both the world of scientists and in the world of faith leaders and people in the congregations, is that a lack of recognizing that there is so much yet to be discovered in the scientific world. I mean, they just found another type of material that is neither a neutron or an electron. I don't know what it's called. You probably know, Nicholas, but it was just recently discovered. So there's much yet to be discovered in the science world, and our scriptures teach us that we see dimly. So in the world of faith and religion and Bible study, we only get a little glimpse of who God is and all that he has done. So I think that it is yet to be seen that even though right now sometimes science and faith seem to conflict with each other, that at someday it's going to all be clear, and it's just our own lack of knowledge that makes them conflict. They don't in my mind and in my heart, there is not a conflict between faith and science, but I think that sometimes people exaggerate it because they can't find a way to bring them to reckon with each other. But I just believe that day is coming, and that's my faith. So that's one of the things. How about you, Jeremy? What do you think about?
Yeah, I'm going to take a little different spin on this one. For me, the area of kind of tension is in the workplace, because I'm not a rabbi, priest, minister, so I have to be very careful as far as expressing my religious views, as well as pushing them on any of my employees. So for me, I can see things one way from my vantage point, and how I want to perceive the world as an agent of change, as one of God's agents trying to make things right. But I can't tell any of my employees to view it that way. And I think that's where kind of the tension comes for me, is that yes, to me, this is an obvious thing where it's clear as day to me, the connection, and that there isn't that they're not two totally separate things, but just making sure that within the workplace that I'm not pushing those ideas onto to any of my staff. I think that's where my personal kind of tensions and conflict arise from.
Yeah, I can relate with that, Jeremy. It's like you have to, it can be frustrating sometimes when you have to tiptoe around anything religious in the workplace. And I understand why, but I have felt that tension very often as well.
So kind of jumping off of that and talking about those kinds of tensions, and also thinking about tension that arises from misconceptions or a lack of understanding or trust, of that which you do not know. What do you wish environmental educators or environmental science practitioners and faith communities knew about each other? So sometimes the obstacle to engaging with one another and to, working together toward these common goals that we've been talking about exists because, we either don't trust each other, or we have misperceptions about, communities of faith, or about folks that work in the environmental science field. So why don't we start, Gina, if you don't mind starting us off with, what is one thing that you wish environmental educators or communities of environmental educators and communities of faith would understand or know about each other?
How much we can help each other. If I think of something like, if we were to come together on something like climate change, there's just so many avenues that we could collaborate and grow and help our communities if we understood how we could work together. And for example, you could think of things like stewardship, planting of trees, and how that helps climate change, but also the suffering of mankind because of the rise in sea levels and all of the different types of weather things that we're dealing with. So that's just an example of people of faith want to love their neighbors and reach out and help one another, and people of science understand, how we could maybe make an impact to turn the tide on climate change. So I think if we could open up conversations, and I think that we have more in common and more interest in what things that we could accomplish together than we open our minds to realize. I don't know. Does that sound okay, Nicholas?
Yeah, no, I think, first of all, if you are an environmentalist talking to the faith community, look, you've got the sales already made. You don't have to sell. What you need to do is find a way for them to engage their passion, and they're already ready to go. I think you have ready-made allies with resources. I just saw a press release that the Episcopal Church is funding a shuttle in Newport for children in the Fourth Ward who aren't able to get to the beach. So we want to make sure they get to the beach. And the idea of children being able to paddle around and play in the tide pools and discover the sort of the wonders of the literal ecology at the beach would be an extraordinary teaching moment. Let me take it though as a scientist. And speaking as a scientist to the faith community, I'd like to say to the faith community, look, don't imagine that scientists are uniformly opposed to faith ideas or faith talk. I think, as you're saying, a lot of times there's a tension in science that you need to keep your faith private. And for good reasons. I mean, I've as a scientist, I've often not let people know that I'm a person of faith, much less an ordained person, if I want to get taken seriously when I'm making a presentation. But scientists have faith, and often it's their faith and their wonder of the sense of divine in the world that motivates their curiosity about the world. Einstein wasn't sure exactly where he fit on the religious scale, but he said he believed in Spinoza's God. And Spinoza's God was the God who was immanent in creation, the contact of the divine. I think for religious people to approach scientists is to just recognize there are a lot of people who are sympathetic to what we want to do, and just don't be jerks, be nice, don't scare anyone away. Jeremy, what do you think?
I would totally second everything that both Gina and Nicholas said, especially on that last piece, because I think one of the things that I wish both of these communities knew about each other is that, a lot of times when you hear, religious, you think, religious fanatics. And same thing with the environmental movement. You think of, tree huggers chaining themselves to, to the forest to make sure it doesn't get, bulldozed over. And, the truth of the matter is that both groups, they really consist of passionate people who really believe in what they're doing, but they both consist of reasonable people who are, intelligent people who, have the capability of listening and understanding, the other side, and that, so the one thing that I guess I wish they knew about each other is that, that they're people just like us, and that, they're not the fanatics that sometimes both sides are made out to be.
So Jeremy, I want to take this next question, stick with you. So let's start to go a little bit deeper about this idea of collaboration, and what does collaboration look like here in Rhode Island? What do you see as the potential possible as we all strive to, not be jerks as our, and care for creation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the potential is incredible there, and we always look for ways to partner within the faith and on the outside of each of our faiths. And I think the potential for interfaith collaboration on the environment is huge, because no matter what religion you are, everyone should be pretty much in agreement on what needs to be done as far as preserving the planet and whatnot. So I think the potential for interfaith collaboration is there, and it's huge. But I also think, and this was mentioned earlier, some of the divisions within our own religions, whether it's within the Jewish religion or Christianity, where as an Orthodox Jew, I don't always see hold the same way that some of my Reform friends, as far as customs and practices, and Catholics do things differently from Episcopalians, and I think that this is one of those uniting things that everyone can agree on, because it's a very non-threatening thing. People don't, even though it is still God's work, people don't necessarily look at doing environmental work and education and conservation as something that's threatening as far as religious work. So I think that there's a tremendous potential out there for a lot of both interfaith and within various sects of various religions for a tremendous amount of collaboration. Gina, what do you think?
I think that I agree with everything that you said, Jeremy. And I think that one way that we could sort of stimulate some of that interaction might be maybe like if the environmental organizations or people who are more on the science base and also are interested in activism and actively engaging the community in projects, maybe speaking one-on-one with someone that's a leader in a church, whether that would be their primary leader or somebody on one of the boards, and maybe either having them speak to the congregation or even get invited to speak to the congregation about some of these stewardship issues, and maybe do projects even on church or church-owned properties. Because I think Nicholas mentioned earlier about that connecting. He talks to people while he's on the Wood River, while he's on the ridge of the Grand Canyon. So as people connect with nature and do these activities, it kind of becomes more a part of who they are. So I think, looking at that as it's often difficult as working in the science environmental arena to find people who will be great volunteers, who will actively do projects that will make a difference in the community. So looking to those congregations as your one of your primary bases of active people to get involved with projects is one way to stimulate that collaboration. And Nicholas, what do you feel about that?
Well, let me be a little provocative, because I think we're in a crisis right now. We're the ocean state. We have a significant amount of coastline. It's threatened because of the rising sea level. We are in a moment when we have to take action. And we got voters. I'm speaking as a person of faith. We have organized communities in every town in Rhode Island that meet weekly and have a shared sense of responsibility for the world around them. And I've had this conversation with other community leaders. I'm a trained lobbyist. I've learned that when I go to the State House or when I speak with legislators, I often will say, oh, you're in this district. We have a church in that district. Do you know those? Do you know that clergy person? Do you know all those people who worship there? They know that is a way for them to be able to get reelected. And I think we have a duty to hold those state legislators to, what are you doing to help our environment this day? We're not just speaking out of kind of an altruism, it's part of our faith. I think it's part of what we have to do to protect the environment, and it's part of what we need to do to provide for the economic future of Rhode Island. There's an awful lot of intersection here to get stuff done. And I would want the environmental community and the faith community to realize that we can work together to really significantly affect change. I've talked to enough churches that think environmental stewardship is taking the styrofoam cups away and using ceramic mugs. That was great for the 70s. We are not in the 70s now. It's, we're facing significant coastal threats. We have got to figure out what we're going to do to reclaim the proper beach fronts. We have to figure out what we're going to do about too many houses. How do we get people back from the water? Those are political problems. And I think we can work together because it's a pretty significant movement when you add everyone together.
I definitely agree with all of that. And we do have one final question but I want to make time for questions from the audience as well. So I'm going to ask this question just open-ended to our panel. And if any of you feel compelled to answer, please do, and then we'll shift to some of our audience questions. Is there one thing you would change that's blocking conversations or collaboration between the two groups? And I think some of you have already addressed a little bit of that, but if anybody has anything else they want to add in that regard, please jump in with it, and then we'll shift over to some of our audience questions. Everyone.
Fear, maybe people have a fear of just opening up the conversation, or fear of the other side, like if they have preconceived notions. There are a lot of stigmas about faith and science, and I'd like to see them disappear.
Nicholas or Jeremy, anything to add to that?
I think that was well spoken.
If I was going to add one quick thing, I would just say it's really important for people who can be open about both parts of their identity. I think that reduces, I mean, I'm essentially, that's my gig, right? I talk about science, I talk about religion, because it helps people to see that you can be both, and you don't have to be one or the other. If we just get to that point, I think, Gina, we can deal with the fear that people have, but that requires people in scientific backgrounds to talk about their faith and people in faith backgrounds to talk about their science.
Thank you. So building off of that, one of the questions from the audience gears towards how do we continue conversations and building these relationships. But I'm making an assumption that this is geared towards younger folks, and maybe that's a poor assumption on my part. But what is being done with religious education to bring the environment into Sunday school? And so I wonder if any of you have experienced religious education environment being brought into religious education settings.
I'll just quickly say we have whole national curriculums on the season of creation that are based on that, and many of the youth programs that I led as a youth person are exactly what we're talking about, almost outward bound like programs to get people into the environment so they can encounter God in that way.
Yeah, I would add that, I've certainly done, I can't count how many lectures for Hebrew day schools and whatnot. Usually they invite me in around the portion of Noah, once again, but it's a great way to, for young people to start, bridging the two worlds. And but even for some of the more advanced, education, even rabbinical school and whatnot, I've had people come out and visit the zoo, and very interesting as far as looking at the various animals and which ones are kosher and which ones aren't. But once you have them there, it opens up the conversation on, did you know that there's only 50 of these left in the world? So eating it might not be the best idea, but I think it's something that unfortunately has not traditionally been a large part of Sunday school, and I think that it really should be part of the curriculum, and certainly I think any way that we can kind of integrate it is really important.
I have taught these types of lessons in a variety of churches, but I think that it really depends on the denomination. I know the Episcopal Church and the Presbyterian Church. There are, and I don't know about every single denomination, but there are very strong curriculums in some of the mainline Christian churches, and I'm sure I don't know much about the Jewish synagogues and stuff, but I've taught some, and I don't know how we could grow that. I mean, certainly as the students study Genesis, it's an opportunity, but I'm not sure that it's strong in all of the curriculums, and I'm not sure what to do about it, except for that one-on-one. If you're involved with the church, then you have that opportunity to. So maybe that's the answer. Get involved with churches and start teaching kids.
Gina, if I could just say, one of the things I think any church would be delighted to have resource is a set of maybe if environmental educators would say, I could speak on these topics. If I knew Jeremy could do a thing on Noah's Ark, well, it doesn't have to just be Hebrew Day schools. They get to hear that. I have a whole thing I do on the Christmas star. I think if people knew that they could use outside speakers to talk about something, talk about how seeds carry life from one generation to another, that can be wrapped into a curriculum. And I think a lot of Sunday schools would be fascinated by that, and just have the environmental educator available to the Sunday school.
Nicholas, it's really interesting that you bring that up, because where the conversation between Dante and he's laughing, because where the conversation between Dante and myself started was the idea of having this Zoomobile come out to St. Luke's to do a program on biodiversity and stewardship. And our instructional staff would provide sort of the program that we conventionally provide. And then the youth faith formation team would provide their perspective and their pieces. And then we would see how the two kind of came together. So I think that's a fabulous idea. And I would love to see environmental educators engage in that way and partner with, with different faith organizations in that manner. Jeremy, were you about to add something?
Stole my thunder. I was going to use that same example.
I was so excited when you said it, because that was the starting point for that brought us to this panel tonight. So another question, and this one I think I'm really curious to hear some of the responses that you have. But how do you see environmental issues intersecting with justice issues? And so I think that just the question straight up, and then also how does it pertain to your work in the faith community?
So if I was going to draw a Venn diagram of justice issues and environmental issues, it would look like this, right? They're right over top of each other. Justice for creation, but justice for affordable food, justice for biodiversity. If you're going to have a healthy environment to raise people in, you're going to need biodiversity. All of that stuff goes directly with it. It's hard for me to imagine a place where I could make an argument where something involving justice wasn't deeply connected to a duty to care for creation.
Yeah, I would add that I just finished rereading Dr. Jeff Bonner's book, Sailing with Noah. He's the CEO at the St. Louis Zoo. And one of the things that he has conversations with various religious groups is wanting to know how much they work with the environment. And for the most part, the response is mostly we work with organizations dealing with hunger and housing and all the human needs, and he makes the argument that really we should be focusing just as much on the environment. So I think that's really an important intersection there as well, just to be able to do that.
I also think of things like sometimes the more poverty-stricken communities end up being a dumping grounds for contamination, and the issue in Flint, Michigan, where basically an urban river was tapped into as a water supply, which is just absolutely mind-boggling. But you have to wonder, would that happen in an affluent community? But you need to be the voice for people and speak up for environmental justice in that way, and so that not one population is taking on the brunt of contamination or pollution affecting their health. People are suffering from asthma and cancer, high cancer rates in these areas. So, that's another area where I think that the environmental community and people of faith could help to bring that environmental justice that would bring health and well-being into those communities.
Absolutely, because we all know that environmental issues disproportionately affect certain groups of people, and especially disadvantaged and whatnot. So I think that once again, partnering together to work on these environmental issues also does definitely help with social justice as well. So the two are kind of connected in many ways.
Sustainable farming, green space access, removing food deserts, as you've talked about. The Flint water crisis strikes me as part of that. The hog farm runoff in the South that goes into communities in poverty. There's just so many places where they deeply connect directly. It's another group of allies. Aha, we'll take the State House by storm.
Well, on that, and that wonderful image of taking this State House by storm, which I just love that image. I want to now begin us to transition us to the final portion of our evening tonight. Thank you all so much. This is a wonderful way for us to begin this conversation, think about how we can be allies and co-participants with God together in caring for creation. And so now I want to pass it on back to Janine to talk us through the end of our time together tonight.
Thank you so much, Dante. Thank you to all of our panelists, and Shireen, you as well. If you all remember, I know we're just going to be just over 8 o'clock, but if you can hang on for a couple more minutes. If you remember at the beginning of the program, I said we hope that this is just the first of many conversations, that this helps spark some collaborations and some partnerships. So I have a little activity for you to do, just with your own thoughts. It's something called Monday Someday, and some of my environmental ed friends on this Zoom will be familiar with this. So I'm sure you all have ideas and questions and maybe some opportunities popping up in your head. So just take a moment to think about what is one thing you can do on Monday, or Friday, because tomorrow's Friday. What's one thing you can do Monday, one step you can take? And what would you love to see happen someday? Like a big idea, a big change. So your action Monday is the first step you take towards bringing something meaningful to fruition someday. So just take a few seconds to think about that. You can even write it down. I have some Monday Someday cards in my office here from different workshops and trainings I've been at. And now Dante is going to explain one thing he's doing at his congregation. So go ahead, Dante.
Thank you. So at St. Thomas Church, we have this adult faith formation, adult education program that pretty much meets year round. And so tonight for us is actually the kickoff of a series on environmental stewardship and care of creation. So for the next 3 weeks after tonight, we're going to continue this conversation. Next week, kind of debriefing this and raising more questions. Then we'll look to what some scripture tells us, and then how individually and collectively we can care for creation, be practices in our own lives to that important advocacy work in this crisis moment. The policy at St. Thomas is that parishioners and friends of the parish are always welcome. And so if you want to join us for that conversation for the next 3 Thursdays at 7, know that you are welcome. And I'm going to drop my email here in the chat. And so feel free to reach out. We'd love to have you join us.
Wonderful. Thank you. And in this same vein, one thing that Rhea is going to do, my Monday action, is going to happen right now. I'm going to put a survey in the chat to everyone. And it's just 2 questions really quick. Tell us how you felt about the program, but also any ideas you have for what you'd like to see Rhea or the zoo or the Episcopal Diocese of Rhode Island do to continue this conversation. We'd love to hear from you. It'll inform our own next steps. And the last thing I'd like to say is, on behalf of Rhea, I want to thank you all again so much for joining us. Thank you to our moderators, Dante and Shireen. You're now my 2 favorite people in the world. On our co-host, the Roger Williams Park Zoo, and the Episcopal Diocese of Rhode Island. And of course, a huge, huge thank you to our panelists, Gina DeMarco, Jeremy Goodman, and Bishop Nicholas. Please have a wonderful rest of your evening, and take care.
Thank you very much. God bless.